The following program is paid for by Lifespan Wealth Management, providing financial advice since 1993. At Lifespan Wealth Management, the main thing they do is provide retirement planning and advice and manage their clients' investment accounts. If you're looking for a financial advisor, contact their office at 478-922-8100 to set up your complimentary consultation. Lifespan Wealth Management has offices in Macon and Warner Robins for your convenience, and you can learn more about them by visiting their website at retirerelax.com. While you're on the site, visit the special report section, which provides great financial education information on many different topics. You can also sign up to receive their digital feeds, which are short videos providing great information relevant to retirement, investing, and matters that affect your money. They also offer seminars to the community at no cost. If you're looking for a guest speaker for your church or civic organization, give them a call to discuss the topics you would like them to cover. Again, their contact number is 478-922-8100. Now, from the Macon studio of News Talk 940 WMAC, it's time for Your Money with Sherry Goss, Randy Goss, Jonathan Eisner, and Corey Albrecht.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. All right, so Randy and Sherry were out of town. They went to Hawaii this week, and I would call it a vacation, but it was actually a, what do you call it, a reward trip or a...
It was like a speaking seminar that they got included in, and
because her production is so good at this firm that that Osaic, our broker dealer, invited her to go to Hawaii for 3 or 4 days, I guess, this week, and they just got back into town late in the week, and so Corey and I said, hey, you know what? You guys rest up. We'll take care of the show. So again, you have got Corey and myself in for today. So thank you for tuning in.
Now for the market recap. The S&P 500 gained more than 5% in May as solid corporate earnings growth and AI enthusiasm were enough for investors to look beyond the near-term economic impact of the war in Iran. Data showed that core inflation, which includes rising gasoline prices, continued to increase. However, investors remain convinced that stocks can power through amid a solid first quarter earnings season and long-term corporate outlooks. The market's darling for May were chip stocks, traditional as well as specialized chip makers. Amid AI hunger for computing capacity and a shortage in chip supply, chip stocks added trillions of dollars to their market cap during the month. How long can the market ignore the fallout from the Iran war? How will the Federal Reserve new chairman handle rising inflation? That remains to be seen. While some investors think we may be on the cusp of a dot-com type bubble, others feel we're only in the second or third inning of the game.
Yeah, it is definitely hard to know how to feel about it at this point. Things are up in such a big way that I can definitely understand both sides. It is also a technological revolution unlike anything we've ever seen. So
and I think that as far as the bubble goes with the dot-com bubble, I mean, those companies kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
A lot of the guys that are pushing the AI, I mean, it's not like you're not going to have Microsoft anymore.
Well, that's the thing is that I think I wasn't old enough to understand and live through the dot-com bubble. You weren't even born. So but my understanding is that back then, the reason a lot of those companies were built on leverage and speculation.
Right.
And now these companies actually have cash on their books, a lot of cash, and they're building something that, to your point, is going to be around and is not going anywhere anytime soon. And the companies are not going to just vanish into the night. So
maybe lose some value, but not
right. Maybe correct
disappear.
a little bit, but I can definitely see where we might be in the second or third inning of the game. So, okay, here is a question that I wanted to throw out there because I've gotten this from time to time. If long-term capital gains get better tax treatment, then why would I ever hold an individual stocks in my IRA? Wouldn't I lose a tax advantage? Honestly, smart question, because on the surface, it sounds backwards. If you own stocks in a regular brokerage account, like a taxable account, and hold them longer than a year, you typically qualify for lower long-term capital gains tax rates, and qualified dividends can also receive favorable tax treatment. But inside a traditional IRA, none of that matters. Everything that comes out of the IRA is generally taxed as ordinary income. So people naturally ask, am I giving up a huge tax benefit by putting stocks in an IRA? Well, sometimes yes, but not always.
And here's where the conversation gets more nuanced. One major advantage of an IRA is that you don't pay taxes every single year while the investment grows. You're not paying taxes on dividends. You're not paying taxes every time you rebalance. You're not paying annual capital gains tax inside the account. The uninterrupted compounding over 20 or 30 years can be incredibly powerful. And remember, many people are in a higher tax bracket during their working years than they'll be in retirement. So if someone got a tax deduction contributing to the IRA while they were in, say, the 32% bracket, but later withdraws money in retirement at 12 or 22%, that can still work out very favorably. Now, from a planning perspective, there is where something's called asset location comes into play. Not all investments are equally tax efficient. For example, bonds generate ordinary income, REITs generate ordinary income, actively managed funds can throw off taxable distributions. Those types of investments are often better suited for IRAs because they're already tax inefficient. Meanwhile, taxable brokerage accounts are often ideal for long-term stock investing, index funds, low turnover ETFs, buy and hold on individual stocks, because those investments tend to benefit the most from long-term capital gains treatment and tax efficiency.
Yep. Now, Roth IRAs are a completely different animal. In a Roth, qualified withdrawals are tax-free forever. So many advisors actually prefer putting higher growth investments inside Roth accounts because all the future appreciation can potentially escape taxation entirely. So what's the bottom line? Holding stocks in a traditional IRA is not necessarily a mistake. In fact, for many investors, it's still perfectly reasonable, especially if they're maxing out retirement plans already. They expect lower tax rates later, like in retirement. They actively trade. That's one good reason to stay in a traditional IRA, because again, you're not triggering taxes along the way when you're making those trades. Or they simply want the convenience of tax-deferred investing. But ideally, you want to think strategically about which assets go into which accounts, because good investing matters, but good asset location can quietly improve after-tax returns over time as well. Here's another case study in a situation that I've come across recently, and I wanted to share with everybody, and that is net unrealized appreciation. You may have never heard the term before, but it actually can be very meaningful. This is a real-world retirement planning strategy that most people, and frankly, many advisors, have probably never even heard of. And again, it's called net unrealized appreciation, or NUA, we'll call it for short. In the right situation, it could potentially save somebody tens of thousands of dollars in taxes. Now, before we get into it, this is not blanket advice by any stretch. NUA strategies are highly technical and need to be coordinated carefully with a CPA, advisor, and often the retirement plan administrator, or the TPA, the third-party administrator. But this is a fascinating case study because it shows how tax planning can completely change the outcome for an individual or for a family.
So let's look at an example. Imagine a 46-year-old who worked for a large publicly traded company for many years. Inside his 401k, he's accumulated a substantial amount of the company's stock. The stock is now worth about $125,000. But here's the key. The original cost basis, meaning what the company's stock was worth when it was put into the plan, is only about $30,000. So that's roughly $95,000 of embedded appreciation sitting inside that retirement account. Now we come to the problem. The client needs access to about $100,000 in the short to midterm. Maybe it's for a business opportunity, maybe it's a bridge to another career, maybe it's debt restructuring, or maybe life just happened. But because he's only 46 years old, accessing retirement money becomes dangerous from a tax standpoint. If he simply liquidates the 401k normally, the IRS treats the entire distribution as ordinary income. So the full $125,000 would potentially become taxable income in 1 year. And to make matters worse, because he's under 59 and a half, there would also be a 10% early withdrawal penalty.
Right. So now here's what we're talking about. Ordinary income taxes, plus the penalty, plus potentially state income taxes. And depending on the tax bracket, this person could easily lose a third or more of the distribution to taxes and penalties. But this is where NUA comes into play, net unrealized appreciation. Under the tax code, employer stock in a qualified retirement plan can sometimes receive special treatment. Instead of liquidating the stock inside the 401k, the shares are transferred what's called in kind directly into a taxable brokerage account. That phrase, in kind, is critical. The stock is not sold first in the 401k. The actual shares themselves move out of the retirement plan into this brokerage account. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The IRS separates the stock into two buckets. Bucket number one is the original cost basis, which is what was paid for the stock originally in the employer plan. In this case, $30,000. That portion is still taxed as ordinary income. Excuse me. And because the client is only 46, that basis portion, that $30,000, would generally still be subject to the 10% early withdrawal penalty as well. But the second bucket, the $95,000 of appreciation, receives completely different treatment. That appreciation is not immediately taxed, and more importantly, is not subject to the 10% early withdrawal penalty. Instead, when the stock is eventually sold, that appreciation is generally taxed at long-term capital gains rates, which we were talking about in the first segment about IRAs, rather than ordinary income tax rates. That distinction can be enormous.
Think about the difference between paying ordinary income tax rates versus long-term capital gains on nearly $100,000. That's potentially a very meaningful tax savings. Now, there are some very important caveats we need to acknowledge. First, NUA are only applied to employer stock held inside of a qualified employer retirement plan. Second, the transaction has to be executed very carefully. If the stock is liquidated inside of the 401k before the transfer is made, the NUA opportunity can be permanently lost. Third, this strategy generally requires what's called a lump sum distribution from the employer plan after a triggering event, like separation from service.
Yep, and another key point, the rest of the 401k does not have to become taxable. In many cases, the employer stock goes to the taxable brokerage account for NUA treatment, like we're talking about, while the remaining retirement assets are rolled tax-free into an IRA separately. So you preserve tax deferral on the rest of the account. Now, I also want to point out something very important from a risk perspective. Just because a strategy is tax efficient does not automatically mean it's appropriate. If someone has a huge concentration of company stock, there's still market risk involved. There's still diversification risk involved. And if the client immediately sells all the stock after the transfer, there could be a large capital gains tax bill. But compared to simply cashing out a retirement account at 46 and getting hammered with ordinary income taxes and penalties, NUA can sometimes create a dramatically better outcome. This is why retirement distribution planning matters a lot. People often spend decades focused on accumulation, building the nest egg. But how you distribute assets can be just as important as how you invested them in the first place. The tax code is full of little pockets like this that we're talking about, and when used correctly, can potentially preserve a lot more wealth for families. And in many cases, it starts simply by knowing that the strategy actually exists.
Now on to a story about China. China wants its companies to embrace AI without firing workers. Last summer, China's biggest employers, tech companies, banks, car makers, and others, were asked how AI could affect their workforces. Some companies said AI could create new jobs over the next several years, but the full implementation of the new technology could also wipe out 30% or more of their existing roles, according to people familiar with the situation. Chinese representatives seemed shaken by the feedback that they received. Then, late last year, the Chinese government warned employers, particularly tech companies with younger workforces, not to cut jobs as they embrace AI. China's action is a bold response to fears that are mounting worldwide over the disruptive impact of artificial intelligence. In the U.S., workers fear the widespread loss of jobs. New graduates have been booing commencement speakers who tout AI. In California, the epicenter of many AI advances, but also home to tech companies that are shedding workers, Governor Gavin Newsom, a potential presidential aspirant, recently signed an executive order calling for ways to help workers displaced by AI.
Even as Chinese companies race to stay at the cutting edge of AI development, Beijing is warning companies against replacing workers with AI, suggesting concern that the technology could create instability in the world's second largest economy. China in recent years has struggled with youth disillusionment, with millions of college graduates competing for a limited number of desirable white-collar jobs. The unemployment rate among 16 to 24-year-olds in urban areas, excluding students, stood at 16% in April. Right now, China is trying to balance between two major priorities: social stability and productivity growth. AI as a potentially transformative technology might force Beijing to make hard trade-offs. China's campaign to accelerate AI adoption, released last August and dubbed AI Plus, gives priority to using the technology in sectors such as manufacturing and logistics, which aren't as sensitive to white-collar job displacement. Late last year, China's Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security told employers, particularly tech companies with younger workforces, to refrain from firing employees as they embrace AI. People familiar with the matter have said, while both state-owned and private companies have long had to secure a sign-off from regulators before conducting large-scale layoffs in China, employers are now being asked to explain layoffs and, in some cases, to prove that the cuts aren't because of AI replacing their jobs.
Recent publicized labor disputes in China have sent a similar message, prompting companies to think twice before firing a worker due to automation. In Hangzhou, a wealthy technology hub in eastern China, a man surnamed Zhao worked as a quality control supervisor checking for errors generated by his company's AI model. According to one case study, he had worked at the tech company for more than a decade and took home an annual salary equivalent of about $44,000. Then last January, his company started using AI to do his job instead. It tried to move him to a different role with a 40% pay cut. He refused, and his company fired him. At 35 years old, Zhao was paying off his mortgage and had been his family's primary breadwinner, according to his lawyer. He saw the job market shrinking and was filled with dread about being replaced by AI. Zhao challenged his employer in arbitration, which turned into a lawsuit. The Hangzhou court ruled in his favor. The company was forced to pay Zhao the equivalent of about $38,000 for wrongful termination. This case sends a strong and clear legal warning to companies across the industry, said Zhao's attorney. Companies cannot use AI upgrading as an excuse for backdoor layoffs and unfair pay cuts.
Yep. In Beijing, a man surnamed Liu had worked for 15 years collecting map data for a Chinese tech company. Then in 2024, his employer started using AI to automate his work. By the end of the year, he lost his job. Liu challenged his employer in arbitration and requested compensation for wrongful termination, and he won. Beijing's municipal government used Liu's case as an example to remind employers that AI isn't a valid reason to fire people. Employers should provide training and job reassignments to workers whose roles are affected by AI, it emphasized. As employers enjoy the benefits of technology, they must also shoulder social responsibilities. The Human Resources Bureau of Beijing Municipal Government wrote in a case study published last December. In April, a senior official said in Beijing that China plans to offer free courses for skilled workers and training programs for college graduates this year to help them adopt AI. Hidden triggers behind budget failures. A recent YouGov survey found that 53% of American adults set a budget for 2026, up from 46% the previous year. However, despite the surge in planning, most budgeters still report that rising costs and impulsive decisions make it extremely difficult to stick to their own spending targets. All right, so this is a new story. The Chinese one was one, and we didn't, in our notes here, notate, or I didn't, that this is a new story. So hidden triggers behind budget failures, that's the topic of this conversation. So we've discussed budgeting a lot on this show. Why? Because it is the foundation that everyone needs. Outside of rising costs, budgets that fail can usually be traced back to a set of emotional and behavioral triggers that operate below the surface of routine financial decisions. A few years back, we did a show on the psychology of money, which highlighted reasons people have a bad relationship with money. Often there are triggers that cause poor money decisions. These decisions could be stress, boredom, social, and a range of other things. Each of us is unique, and what triggers you are probably different than your spouse or your best friend. Fidelity wrote a good paper on this topic, and they provide 7 budgeting tips to help make budgeting easier and hopefully improve your financial management.
The first is that emotional spending is a budget saboteur. The biggest threat to a monthly spending plan is not a surprise bill, but the emotional impulse that follows a stressful day at work or at home. Fidelity's guide draws a direct connection between how a purchase makes you feel in the moment and whether you repeat that purchase in weeks ahead. There are budgeting apps that can send daily motivational text to reinforce positive saving behavior. We're not going to provide the names of these because we have not tested them, but you can Google budgeting apps that send motivational texts and recommendations. Old school methods work too. Many people, including us, still prefer keeping a notepad on the counter and annotating everything you spent money on that day. This method has been a proven effectiveness over the years, but like Randy said, or has said on the show before, you need to adopt a system that works for you. I personally like to use pen and paper, but a lot of my friends use apps for tracking their expenses. Like Sherry said in previous times, writing it down is just has more of an impact than typing it on your phone.
Yeah.
I do like that apps can track subscriptions though, because it's something that you may not be able to put down on paper, and it kind of just goes beyond what you're thinking. So
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. So I think that apps that track subscriptions could be an important part of the conversation if you like the notepads. It's a little bit harder to get those.
Right.
You can also motivate yourself by creating reminders on a goal that you want to reach, like a vacation or a new car that you've been saving for. Setting your mobile phone home screen up with a background picture of that goal, which could be a subtle reminder to limit your spending. Social comparison can also lead to overspending, making discretionary purchases feel like necessities, especially when friends or coworkers treat upgrades and little splurges as routine rather than intentional choices. If you're spending to keep up with the Joneses, then you should work hard to break that emotional trigger. Understanding the motivation behind a purchase is often the first step toward breaking the cycle of impulse spending.
You should also be aware of, and we've talked about this before too, of lifestyle creep. A raise creates room in the budget, but that extra space tends to vanish as small upgrades accumulate across subscriptions, dining habits, and daily convenience purchases. You should regularly audit your spending to catch categories where costs have been rising unnoticed. Remember that the numbers don't lie. Track your spending and you'll see where your money is going that could be better spent or saved elsewhere. Lifestyle creep is simply unintentional spending driven by a lack of awareness. Upgrading your lifestyle is fine if the decision is deliberate rather than automatic. Earlier, we mentioned apps that help you track your expenditures. Bottom line is you must find one that works for you. The tracking method you choose matters as much as the budget itself, because a system that feels like a chore is a system you will abandon within days. We would recommend that you review and adjust your budget on a regular basis. If income changes, adjust the budget. This simple process can prevent surplus cash from disappearing into upgrades. Automate your savings to remove temptations. Many households absorb every dollar of new income into larger purchases instead of updating their spending plan to reflect the raise. As part of automation, remember to add your savings account first as part of the long-range plan. Be patient to sustain budget discipline and long-term goals. Long-term persistence is far more valuable than any single month of perfect tracking. Patience and practice matter more than short-term perfection. So if your budget does not work one month, don't beat yourself up. Give yourself a little grace and adapt a long-term perspective.
Accountability is also important. You might consider pairing up with someone who shares similar money goals. Making a simple arrangement with a friend or more structured setup with a group like a running club, but for money, to build the motivation needed to stick with the budget. An important thing to do is reward small wins, celebrating savings milestones with low-cost rewards, a strategy that helps reinforce positive habits without undermining the financial progress that created the milestone. Financial self-awareness may matter more than spreadsheets. The gap between creating a budget and actually following one has less to do with math and more to do with behavior. Emotional spending, lifestyle creep, and tracking systems that feel like chores can quietly dismantle even the most detailed spending plan.
Okay, next up, Americans are falling behind on their $1.25 trillion credit card bill. After working all day as an operations director at a busy New England hospital, Catherine Clark would lie awake at night wondering where she went wrong. Despite her $194,000 salary, Clark's Chase Sapphire credit card balance had crept up to $15,000. She could afford the $572 monthly payment, minimum payment, but with a 26% interest rate, it barely made a dent. Like many Americans, Clark, who's 42, was pushed to her financial limit by the 1-2 punch of inflation and the highest interest rates in decades. She avoided going out with friends to save money and considered taking a second job as a receptionist at her gym. She imagined something terrible befalling her and her parents discovering her mounting credit card bills. It felt very similar to a struggle with weight, Clark said. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, and then suddenly you're like, oh, well, now my pants don't fit all of a sudden. In the first quarter of this year, the percentage of credit card balances that were at least 90-day delinquent rate rose to 13.12%, according to data released in May by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. That's the highest level in 15 years and the most since the period following the 2008 financial crisis.
America's total credit card balance stood at $1.25 trillion in the first quarter, according to the New York Fed, up from $1.18 trillion in that quarter last year. That's the highest first quarter balance since the New York Fed began recording the measurement in 1999. President Trump has played down economic stress from higher prices. Asked earlier this month whether the financial situation of America was a motive to end the Iran war, he said, not even a little bit. Republicans in Congress, though, are facing mounting voter anxiety over the economy ahead of the November midterms. Average interest rates on cards rose to 21% in February from 14.6% in February 2022, according to a survey of credit card issuing banks by the Federal Reserve last year. 5.6% of credit card holders were 60 days or more behind on their payments, surpassing pre-pandemic levels. According to data compiled by Bruno Braga, an economist with the Urban Institute, a left-of-center research group, over the past 2 years, his analysis showed that the rate rose to its highest level since 2018 for residents of lower, middle, and upper-income communities alike.
When food, housing, and healthcare all is more expensive, there's less money to pay off your credit card, Braga said. So more people are faced with decisions. They don't want to lose their house or their cars. They need to pay their utility bills. They're more likely to stop paying their credit cards first. Americans straining to pay off their debt have flooded credit counseling agencies. The National Foundation for Credit Card Counseling, a network of nonprofits that helps people reduce credit card debt, said it had 24% more clients in January than a year earlier. Its average number of monthly clients was 60% higher this year than in 2018. We'll go to halftime right now.
You've been listening to Your Money, brought to you by Lifespan Wealth Management, proudly serving Middle Georgia for over 30 years. Our mission? Helping folks just like you plan for a secure and stress-free retirement. Need a trusted financial advisor? Call us today at 478-922-8100 and schedule your complimentary consultation at our Macon or Warner Robins office. Want to learn more? Visit us anytime at retirerelax.com. Because when you plan smart, you can retire and relax. And here's something extra. We offer free educational seminars for the community. If your group needs a guest speaker, give us a call and let's make it happen. That's 478-922-8100. Now, let's get back to the show.
All right. So if you're not careful, you can watch a ballooning balance. We're still on the credit card story. Melissa Megason, a medical assistant from South Portland, Maine, is one of those clients. She always managed to keep her credit card balances near zero. Megason, who earned $65,000, and her then husband, who made about $70,000 working at a shipyard, used their cards only for gas, groceries, and emergency care for their 4 dogs. That allowed them to pay down other expenses, $7,000 in back taxes, the remaining bills from her 2016 gastric bypass surgery, and a $1,250 monthly mortgage on their home. When they divorced in 2023, her financial stability was shattered. Alone for the first time in 30 years, she began using credit cards on items to help her cope, such as cooking equipment for a baking hobby and new jeans after she lost weight. She started putting dog food and vet appointments on the cards as well. The interest rate on one card reached 29%. Each time she missed a payment, the late fees made it impossible to pay even the minimum. Within 9 months, Megason's credit card balance ballooned to over $20,000. With missed payments and late fees, the minimum on her Capital One card rocketed to $1,600, the minimum monthly payment. Collection agencies rang her constantly. They don't let up with the phone calls. She said she was being called every hour, at work, at home, all day long, but she just didn't have the money.
Americans carry, on average, about $6,500 to $6,700 in credit card debt, according to credit reporting agencies. The percentage of cardholders with balances of more than $10,000 has risen in communities across different income levels since 2018. Analysis from Urban Institute data shows Last year, 17% of cardholders in low-income communities held balances greater than that amount, and 20% in medium-income communities, and 25% in higher-income communities. The National Foundation for Credit Counseling produces a quarterly financial stress forecast that predicts credit card delinquency rates based on client metrics from credit card counseling groups. Delinquencies risk levels over the past 12 months have been the highest since the forecast inception of 2022. Middle-class households in particular are struggling to pay down balances as more families shift to a pattern of survival debt, said Bruce McClary, spokesperson for the foundation.
In Megason's case, the incessant bills and collection calls, coupled with the anguish of divorce, were like an ear-splitting noise that she could not quiet. One night in August of 24, she tried to kill herself. Terrified, she contacted a friend who called 911. She was hospitalized for a week. When she got out, she sold her house using the $100,000 net that she made on the house to pay off most of her debt, except to credit cards. American Consumer Credit Counseling, a nonprofit that works with credit card companies to reduce interest rates and monthly payments for people in debt, helped her devise a payback plan. She has since paid off about half of her credit card debt with payments of $586 a month. Recently remarried, she has sworn off credit cards, though her husband keeps one for emergencies. The couple can narrowly swing their $2,500 rent on a townhouse in South Portland, but are looking to purchase a small house to save money. The jump in interest rates is making it especially hard for those on low economic rungs to dig out of debt. Cardholders in low-income communities, which are zip codes with an average household income of less than $89,500, had 60-day delinquencies of 8%, the highest rate of any income level, according to Braga's analysis.
Another issue is the game of juggling. Joseph Daniel Host, 46 years old, was working as an executive assistant at the Episcopal Church in Grosse Pointe Farms, Michigan, several years ago when the trouble started with his credit cards. Daniel Host, who made $40,000 at the time, relied on his 3 cards as a way to plug the gap when cash got low toward the end of the church's 2-week pay period. Gas and groceries, a new set of sheets at Target, the occasional dinner out with friends. For Daniel Host, a classically trained pipe organist who plays in regional orchestras and teaches piano on the side, his expenditures hardly seemed exorbitant. Besides, he lived rent-free in church housing. He would stagger payments, making headway on one card by paying just over the minimum one month, then doing the same on a different card the next month. But with interest rates on the card rising to between 24 and 26%, the balances veered in the wrong direction. It was a perilous game of juggling, he said. I could see the debt grow even though I was making payments. A large percentage of people carrying persistent balances, said Scott Schulch, an economist at the West Virginia University who studies credit card spending. They are hit hard when interest rates spike, especially if their balances are high. If you only pay the minimum balance, you may never pay off credit card debt.
Yeah, we say it all the time. Be very careful what you casually swipe the credit card for, because if you don't have a plan to pay that off, when we pay our credit cards every month in my house, but if you don't have a plan to pay that off, it can definitely come back to haunt you, and in a hurry too. So, all right, next up, real estate agents are quitting the slow housing market. Kim Taylor bet her career on the housing market. In mid-2023, the real estate agent launched her own brokerage with her husband, Gordon. The market in the Fort Worth, Texas area had cooled from its pandemic-era frenzy, but business was still good. Taylor started out with a team of 7 agents and quickly brought 6 more on board. By 2024, high mortgage rates and prices were weighing on demand, and homes sat on the market. Most of Taylor's agents had to find other part-time or full-time jobs just to stay afloat. Her husband took a job last year working for a school district. We just became a bleeding artery, said Taylor, who started working in real estate in 2015. The last 11 months have been the hardest of my career. She closed the brokerage this spring and joined another firm. The slowest housing market in decades is stretching into its 4th year, and even real estate agents who made it this far are reaching a breaking point. Most of them are independent contractors and get paid only when a deal closes. With fewer sales to go around and homes taking longer to sell, more agents are ditching the industry or finding second jobs.
The downturn is also hitting mortgage loan officers and many other industries reliant on home sales, from appraisers and photographers to appliance manufacturers. There's so many pieces to the puzzle of a home sale, said Sherry Lane, who sells home warranty policies in Texas. If the homes aren't moving, it's going to affect all of us. Lane said her sales are down from a few years ago. The housing market is cyclical. Excuse me. And it is common for employment to grow during booms and fall during busts. But the current slow market has lasted longer than most anyone expected. When measured as a share of total households, last year's existing home sales pace was the worst since 1982, according to an analysis by First American Financial. The slow market isn't the only obstacle facing real estate agents. A legal settlement in 2024 that changed how agents get paid encouraged some buyers to forego hiring an agent. The rise of artificial intelligence has also made it easier for buyers and sellers who want to navigate the process on their own. The slowdown is especially hurting smaller companies, with some being acquired by large brokerages, builders, and lenders. Bigger companies can invest in better technology or offer multiple business lines, such as title and escrow services, to becoming a one-stop shop for home buyers and sellers.
The National Association of Realtors had 1.4 million members as of April, down from a peak of 1.6 million in October of 2022. Compared with past market downturns, the membership decline since 2022 has been modest. Membership numbers don't tell the whole story, however. Many agents choose to keep their real estate licenses active even when they find other jobs, in case opportunities come up in the future. About 71% of agents surveyed by NAR, the National Association of Realtors, in 2025 said real estate was their only profession, the lowest proportion on record in survey data going back to 2005. Many agents had to get a secondary source of income to pay the bills. The most productive agents are still succeeding, but the housing downturn has hollowed out the real estate professional middle class. The housing boom that started in 2020 attracted newcomers to real estate, but many found it tough going after the market slowed. The typical agent with 2 years of experience or less did 3 transactions in 2024 and earned $8,100 in gross income from real estate, according to the NAR survey. The typical agent of any experience level completed 10 transactions in 2024 and earned $58,000 in gross income, according to the survey.
Erica of Silver Springs, MD, got her real estate license in 2021 when home sales were booming and did 2 transactions that year. She worked part-time as an agent while keeping her sales job at a furniture manufacturer. Erica, ramped up to 4 deals in 2022 and 2023, earning about $45,000 in commissions each year before taxes and expenses. But she only closed 1 deal in 2024, and the extra income wasn't worth the stress, she said. She gave up her license in early 2025. It's a lot of energy and a lot of money just to exist as a real estate agent, she said, citing costs for licensing, brokerage fees, marketing, and coaching. When you're not closing the transaction, it makes it feel really hard to continue. The mortgage industry employment has also declined about 40% from its peak in 2021. The count of the most active mortgage loan originators, those who do at least 10 deals a year, has dropped roughly 50%. I think one of the big issues with the housing market is when the rates were low, the prices for homes skyrocketed. And now that borrowing isn't cheap anymore, the prices didn't go down to match that.
Right.
So, I mean, a lot of people you could afford a more expensive house when it was a 3% interest rate on the mortgage.
Right.
But you can't afford that when it's, at this point, double.
Yeah. A lot of people have absolutely been priced out of being able to purchase a new home, or at least the one they would have wanted in 2019.
And I think that's kind of just why everything's sitting right now is the prices aren't reflecting the interest rates. They kind of jumped up and they haven't really fallen down equivalent to how much the interest has jumped.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how the housing market shakes out for sure. It doesn't appear to be heading in a good direction.
No.
The Trump administration wants autos under the USMCA to be at least 50% made in America. The Trump administration is expected to propose a change to the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement that's the USMCA, that would require half of the components and materials in an automobile to come from U.S. sources in order to qualify for lower tariffs under the pact. The rule would greatly increase the amount of U.S. content required in cars made under the so-called USMCA, measured by the dollar value of the components. The pact currently requires 3/4 of a vehicle's materials to come from North American sources, but has no U.S.-specific content requirement.
The new proposal was prepared ahead of negotiations over how to restructure the USMCA, which President Trump signed in 2020 and is up for review this year. According to the people familiar with the planning, a U.S. delegation in Mexico City this week for a first round of formal discussions on the pact with the Mexican government. The new proposal represents the Trump administration's starting position in the USMCA negotiations with Mexico and could change over the coming months as talks advance. The U.S. team is also expected to propose increasing the amount of North American content that would be required in such vehicles be above the 75% currently required by the pact. The 50% U.S. component proposal is likely to be viewed skeptically by many automakers, who would struggle to source half of their components from the U.S., particularly if there is only a short phase-in period. Conversely, it would likely be welcomed by the United Auto Workers and the other U.S. unions, who would see increases in work and employment as a result of this rule.
Automobiles that meet the so-called regional content requirements are currently exempt from most tariffs under the USMCA, but it remains unclear whether that largely duty-free treatment will persist after renegotiation of the pact. Greer has said a renewed pact will likely include some level of tariffs on Mexico and Canada. Greer and other Trump officials have said publicly that they want to direct more automotive production to the U.S. as part of the restructuring of the USMCA. The new proposals on U.S. and North American content would be part of the push to reshore that manufacturing. Reuters earlier reported that the Trump team wanted a U.S.-specific content requirement, but the 50% figure had been unreported. President Trump has publicly threatened to terminate the USMCA, which he negotiated in his first term, to replace the North American Free Trade Agreement, known as NAFTA. Greer has also floated separating the three-nation agreement into two separate pacts, one with Mexico and one with Canada. Some foreign automobile makers have warned the Trump administration they may pull cheap models out of the U.S. market if the USMCA isn't renewed as a three-nation pact with lower or no tariffs. Automakers assembling vehicles in Mexico for the U.S. market would likely face a challenge meeting the 50% threshold for U.S. parts, especially if the new requirement takes effect quickly. For example, only 11% of the parts value in General Motors' GMC Terrain SUV, which is assembled in Mexico, come from the U.S. or Canada, according to federal data. Most of the crossover's parts come from Mexico, including its engine and transmission.
Now on to a school-related topic. The Academy rethinks the SAT. 6 years ago in the year 2020 of progressive pandemic madness, the University of California led the Ivory Tower movement to drop standardized tests as an admissions requirement in the name of equity. The experiment has been a failure, as more than 750 professors in STEM disciplines across the UC system now admit we may need to reverse course. We now observe preparation gaps so severe that instructors must reteach middle school mathematics while simultaneously teaching the material students need for sciences, engineering, economics, and other quantitatively demanding fields. The professors wrote in an open letter to the Board of Regents. The Board of Regents in May 2020 moved to scrap the university's SAT-ACT requirements on the spurious rationale that tests discriminate against minorities. Governor Gavin Newsom, who appoints most regents, has claimed that tests exacerbate the inequalities for underrepresented students, even though a faculty Senate report found otherwise.
Test scores add substantially to UC's ability to predict student success beyond high school grades, especially for minority groups, the faculty report said. It stressed that the university does not appear to use standardized test scores in a way that amplifies racial disparities. Without test scores, admissions would hinge on inflated grades, extracurricular activities, and essays. Those warnings have played out. The new faculty letter says that for 3 consecutive years, 20 to 30% of UC Berkeley first semester calculus students who participated in mathematical diagnostic testing displayed severe preparation deficits, drop standards, and learning mastery declines. Imagine that. The letter stresses that current admissions standards cannot reliably distinguish readiness for university-level STEM majors in an era of severe grade inflation and AI-assisted application essays. Eliminating the test requirement has resulted in admitting students to STEM programs without a reliable measure of whether they are prepared to succeed, and this serves no one. Failing to measure preparation gaps does not remove barriers, it moves them into the classroom, where they become harder to overcome. Obscuring preparation gaps harms both students individually and the university collectively. It offers the appearance of access while undermining the chance of success.
A major goal of eliminating the test requirements was to run the state constitutional ban on race-based performances. Another was to obscure educational disparities caused by the state's union-run public school system that disproportionately harm minorities. The letter amplifies alarms raised by the UC San Diego report last fall that found that 1 in 8 of the school's freshmen had math skills below high school level, defined as geometry, algebra, and algebra 2, a 30-fold increase since 2020. Credibly, 1 in 12 lacked middle school math skills, and 94% had completed an advanced math course and received an average A- in their high school math classes. Eroding admission standards and obscuring academic deficiencies set students up for failure. And I think it's just something like they say it's, because we don't want to discriminate, but I feel like it was almost a greediness because they're getting paid whether the students do well or not. So if they just accept everyone, that kind of just brings in more money without actually giving them the chance that they need to succeed. I don't know if maybe that's just kind of how it panned out and wasn't really their intention.
The intention, right.
But it kind of seems like the only people benefiting from accepting everyone is the school.
Right. But even then, this is talking about how it's in the long run, it has hurt the school.
Oh, yeah.
But you're right.
Their average, but
maybe it was for their reputation in the first place. But okay, diving benefits that come with VA disability. I found this interesting. Sherry has a client that mentioned this service to her, so we're telling this on her behalf. Veterans who need to get to the VA or other military-related doctor's appointments can have their driving benefits. Okay, not diving. That would have been cool.
Yeah,
if there were benefits for diving. All right, so driving benefits with VA. All right, so she had a client tell her about this. Veterans who need to get to the VA or other military-related doctor's appointments can have their expenses reimbursed. In some cases, they'll make arrangements to get you picked up and dropped off. It's called the Veterans Transportation Service, or the VTS. The VA operates the VTS, and depending on your local VA facility, they may offer door-to-door pickup, shuttle vans, transportation to VA appointments, transportation to VA-authorized community care appointments. This is often used by veterans who cannot drive or have mobility limitations or are elderly or live far from the VA facilities. You can request rides through the VA's ride service or your local VA transportation office.
If a VA provider documents that it's medically necessary, the VA can approve wheelchair vans, ambulances, and other specialized transportation if needed. This is called Special Mode Transportation, or SMT. It generally requires eligibility for VA travel benefits, and a VA clinician stated that specialized transport is medically required. It's not limited to 100% disabled vets, though. The travel reimbursement benefit actually starts much lower than most people realize. You may qualify if any of these apply. If your VA disability is rating of 30% or higher and you're traveling to the VA or VA authorized medical appointments. 2, if you're being treated for a service-connected condition, even if your rating is below 30%. 3, you receive a VA pension. 4, your income is below certain VA limits. Or 5, you're traveling for a CNP exam service dog appointment, transplant care, or certain other approved situations.
Here are some examples based on disability rating and eligibility, the respective eligibility. At 10 to 20%, you are eligible if the appointment is for a service-connected condition. At 30% disability, you're generally eligible for VA medical appointments. At 50% and higher, you're eligible in most all situations. The reimbursement can cover mileage driven to and from appointments, parking fees, tolls, and in some cases, meals and lodging if pre-approved, as well as community care appointments that VA authorized outside the VA system.
One thing many veterans miss is that it applies to more than just doctor's visits. Lab work, imaging, mental health appointments, community care referrals, and even some walk-in services can qualify if they are VA related. Another commonly overlooked detail is that there is generally no minimum distance requirement. Even relatively short trips can qualify, though reimbursement amounts will obviously be smaller. Claims usually need to be submitted within 30 days of the appointment. Most veterans do it through the VA Beneficiary Travel Self-Service System, or the BTSSS.
I thought that was some very good information for potentially a lot of our listeners to know. So, all right, we're going to go out on a little bit more of a fun, I guess, article. This is a creative way to save money. Saveopoly is a creative savings challenge that turns building wealth into a game. Inspired by the familiar layout of a Monopoly board, Saveopoly helps people stay motivated by giving them a visual way to track progress towards a savings goal. The concept is simple. First, decide how much money you want to save. For example, if your goal is $2,000, you might divide that amount among the spaces on a Saveopoly board. Each square is assigned a dollar amount, such as $10, $20, or $30, or even more. Every time you save money, you mark off one of the squares and transfer that amount into your savings account. The process works in several steps. The first step is choosing a savings goal and a timeline. Some people use Saveopoly to build an emergency fund, save for vacation, pay cash for holiday gifts, or create a down payment for a major purchase. Having a clear purpose gives the challenge meaning and helps participants stay committed. The second step is setting up the board. A Saveopoly board can be printed from a template or created by hand. The amounts on the board can be customized to fit a person's budget. Someone just beginning to save may use amounts ranging from $5 to $50, while a more aggressive saver may use amounts from $25 to $200, or even more. The third step is funding the challenge. Participants then roll a die to see what amount they need to add to the pot. This can be done on a weekly basis, but many recommend that it is done every 2 weeks to line up with a paycheck. This way the amount comes out when you get it, and you know you will have enough to pay toward the goal. Every completed square represents real progress. Instead of seeing savings as a distant goal, people can see their accomplishments accumulating one space at a time.
One reason Saveopoly is effective is that it makes savings visible. Traditional savings goals often feel abstract because money is transferred into an account and then forgotten. Saveopoly creates a visual reminder of success. Each completed square provides a sense of achievement, similar to crossing items off a checklist. This positive reinforcement can make people more likely to continue saving. Another benefit is flexibility. Unlike rigid budgeting systems, Saveopoly allows participants to adjust their contributions based on their circumstances. During a month with extra income, you can roll multiple times. During tighter months, a single roll can keep the challenge moving forward without kind of giving you the stress of having to contribute every 2 weeks. Perhaps the greatest strength of Saveopoly is that it changes the psychology of savings. Many people view saving as something restrictive or boring, while spending provides immediate gratification. Saveopoly introduces an element of fun and accomplishment that helps compete with the temptation to spend. By turning the process into a game, savers become more engaged and motivated. In the end, Saveopoly demonstrates an important financial principle. Successful savings does not always require complex strategies. Sometimes the most effective approach is creating a system that encourages consistency. One square at a time, small deposits add up, and what begins as a simple game can result in a meaningful financial progress. There are printouts online that you can download or copy for your own use. If you're struggling with keeping a plan, try to switch it up and make it a game. The new angle for savings may be what you need to stay on track. This can also be a fun way to invest if there's anything that you're saving up for.
Yep, that sounds like a cool game and probably not a terrible exercise. You know, it wouldn't hurt anything to try to make some fun of it and make a habit of savings out of that. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We hope to have Randy and Sherry with us next week. See you later.
Thanks for listening to Your Money, produced by Lifespan Wealth Management. As financial advisors, the main thing they do is provide retirement planning and advice and manage their clients' investment accounts. If you're looking for a financial advisor, please contact their office at 478-922-8100 to set up your complimentary consultation. You can learn more about them by visiting their website, retirerelax.com. And if you have a question or a topic that you would like them to cover in next week's broadcast, you can email Randy at rfmoney.com. They look forward to connecting with you next week. Have a great weekend, everyone. Securities and investment advisory services offered through Osaic Wealth Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. Osaic Wealth is separately owned, and other entities and or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of Osaic Wealth.